A massive crowd gathers around the execution square, watching from the stands as the final preparations are made below. An old official with a beard looks pretty shaken while he grips his pen, ready to sign the paperwork that ends it all. The news is finally made official. The execution of Arthur Pendragon has been carried out, and the whole city is watching. Arthur is led toward the platform in heavy shackles, while one guard asks if the chains actually work to keep his magic suppressed. The other guard confirms it, but even with the crowd calling him a demonic prince, Arthur just stares ahead with this intense look. He stands on the wooden stage looking out at the sea of faces, totally stunned by how many people showed up for this. Arthur starts to lose it, screaming at the top of his lungs and asking the crowd what he actually did to deserve this. He hits the ground groaning, wondering if they hate him because he never used his powers to help them, all while a mysterious guy watches him. The thoughts keep racing through his head as he cries, questioning if his real mistake was just never trying to understand how much they were hurting. But he doesn't get much time to think, because a guard jerks his chain hard and yells at him to stay down on the floor. Arthur gets slammed onto the wooden floor of the stage, lying there completely defeated as he wonders if his real mistake was something else entirely. His mind races while he's trapped in those heavy chains. He starts thinking that maybe he's in this mess simply because he never did anything for anyone, and the guilt starts sinking in. The mysterious blonde man just keeps watching him from the side with that same calm look, while Arthur is totally lost in his head. Suddenly he hears a voice calling him Big Brother, which makes the tears start falling even harder as he whispers the name Mordred, trying to find the words to say something back, but he just can't get them out. The mysterious man tells him flat out that he never cared about anyone else's feelings, and that reality check really breaks him. Staring up at the guillotine, Arthur finally realizes what it actually feels like to be the one getting hurt and being wounded like this, all while the guards keep dragging his body toward the center of the platform. Some guy in the crowd yells at him to keep moving, looking way too happy to see him heading toward his end. Arthur is totally losing it, finally realizing just how much all of this actually hurts, and he can't believe it because nobody ever bothered to tell him the truth about any of this. He remembers growing up on that throne where everyone told him that as long as people obeyed him, nothing else mattered. The guards finish setting things up while he lies there, wondering what he would do if he actually had a real chance to just start his whole life over from the beginning. The executioner stands right over him and tells Arthur that this is finally the end for him. He asks Arthur if he's got any last words before it's over, but Arthur just stares at the floor as tears keep streaming down his face. He's completely broken and doesn't even try to say anything back. The crowd watches the stage with these creepy smiles while the giant blade waits at the top of the frame. Right as the blade starts to drop, his very last thought is just wondering how much it's going to hurt. Arthur bolts upright with a massive scream, his heart racing as he sits there alone in the middle of a giant, fancy bedroom, just staring at his hands and touching his chest, wondering how he's alive. He starts running through the room yelling that he's really back, seeing all the jewelry and gems the nobles gave him that were supposed to be gone. He runs outside and loses it when he sees the castle standing tall, the same one they burnt down. He drops to his knees, panting and wondering what else is still here after everything he lost in that nightmare. Suddenly, a bunch of cheerful maids surround him, yelling good morning to the prince. Arthur gets a small smile, finally accepting it's real as a maid calls his name. The maid tells Arthur that breakfast is ready, and he nearly loses it with excitement, shouting for joy because he claims he hasn't had a real meal in forever, which leaves the maid standing there totally confused and asking him to repeat himself. Arthur starts rambling about how the revolutionaries only gave him stale bread and watery soup, a memory of a future that hasn't happened yet, and the whole hallway goes quiet as the maid just stares at him. He panics, realizing he's making a scene, so he tries to shake it off, telling himself that the whole execution thing was just a really bad nightmare and nothing more. He stands in front of a massive painting of himself, thinking there's no way a prince like him would ever end up being killed like that. Arthur gets a huge, goofy grin on his face, convinced that he's actually destined for a super glorious future, but the maids are watching from the side, whispering about why he's staring at his own portrait so intensely and wondering if he's going to have the painter punished. Turns out, he's just annoyed because he thinks the artist could have made him look a lot cooler. The maids just look on, realizing that even if he's acting a little weird today, he's still the same arrogant prince they've always served. The maids look at Arthur from a distance, thinking about how the prince never really gave a damn about the commoners anyway. One of the staff members calls out to him urgently, getting his attention while he's walking through the palace halls, and explains that the head chef is having a total meltdown because something went wrong in the kitchen. So the chef explains that the flour delivery got held up, and there won't be any bread for breakfast, which actually makes Arthur stop and think for a second. He just smiles and tells them that if there isn't any bread, they should just serve cake instead, acting like it's the most obvious solution ever. He walks away feeling like a total boss, fully convinced that every single thing in his life is going to go exactly how he wants. And later on, he sits outside in the garden for tea, thinking to himself that this is exactly what his perfect, normal life should look like. While he's enjoying the sun, a couple of the maids start whispering to each other behind his back, and one of them asks the other if she actually heard the crazy thing he just said a minute ago, especially since she can't believe he really suggested serving cake just because they ran out of bread. Arthur tries to enjoy his tea, but he can't stop thinking about how out of touch royalty is, and the sound of people laughing at him starts filling his head until he can't take it anymore, so he tells the maids he's heading back to his room and to just bring the tea later. The maids call out to him in surprise, but Arthur just starts running through the garden as fast as he can, leaving the staff behind, where one maid realizes he definitely heard them talking trash, though the other one doesn't seem to care at all. Arthur makes it back inside and slams his bedroom doors shut to lock himself away, and he leans against the wood, panting and trying to remind himself he's supposed to be a lucky prince, that the other life was just a bad dream. But he can't stop the memories of his execution from dripping into his mind, seeing himself standing in the rain, looking totally broken, and he just stares at his hand, crying because he can't figure out why those horrible days feel so real if they never actually happened. His hands won't stop shaking as he realizes how terrifying it is to have these memories stuck in his head, and he just closes his eyes and groans, trying to block out the mental mess he's currently stuck in. Chaos breaks out everywhere as a mob starts rounding people up while fires burn in the background, and news spreads that Mordred's army has officially reached the capital, leaving everyone in a total state of shock. Arthur struggles against the guards holding him, yelling for them to let him go and calling it treason while he screams Mordred's name, but he's mostly just confused, looking at his brother and asking why any of this rebellion is even happening. Desperate to fix things, Arthur asks if they just want money and promises to cover everyone in gold, but the guards just laugh in his face like it's a joke, which leaves him standing there feeling completely lost, and Mordred just looks at him coldly, calling him brother, as Arthur tries to understand what's going on. Mordred tells him his wealth actually ran out a long time ago, and Arthur's face just drops as he hears the news, so he stammers that it's impossible, but Mordred just tells him to think about all the money he's been wasting lately. Arthur tries to say he'll talk to the guys in charge of the treasury, but Mordred lets him know those nobles already packed up and ran. Arthur looks up at Mordred with sweat dripping down his face, barely managing to whisper out brother, but Mordred just looks back with zero pity, telling Arthur that he really hasn't changed at all. Things get brutal after that. Arthur gets thrown into a cell and beaten, crying out that it hurts as the guards drag him around by his hair. One of the guards stops at the door and asks if he finally gets how the commoners feel, leaving Arthur collapsed on the cold floor while the guy just says goodbye and walks away. Lying there in the dark, Arthur thinks to himself that if he could only use his powers, he wouldn't be in this mess, but he's got nothing left, and the reality of the situation just makes him grab his head and spiral. He remembers how they locked him up right after the rebellion started, and how the same people he used to rule over took turns messing with him every day. He realizes that every time they finished beating him, something even weirder happened, and right on cue, this girl shows up out of nowhere in the darkness, smiling as she says hello to him. Arthur remembers how that same woman would always show up in his cell. She'd grab his broken arm and just smile at him, asking if he was in pain while he lay there helpless on the floor. He's currently on his knees in front of the palace doors, thinking about how that nightmare felt way too real to just be a dream. The memory is so intense that his eyes snap open, but just as he's coming to, a voice calls out to him from the side, addressing him as Prince Arthur. The person asks what he's doing just sitting there on the ground, and as Arthur looks up, the maid leans over and asks if he's in pain. It's the exact same woman from his nightmare standing right there. He starts to lose it, realizing this lady was actually his maid the whole time, and he starts backing away while she just stands there looking down, acting like she can't believe what's happening. Arthur flinches and tells her to stay away, which completely freaks the girl out as she lets out a little scream. Arthur is gasping for air, looking totally freaked out while the tea tray and cups go flying, crashing all over the floor. The maid starts yelling at him, saying it's all his fault because he barged in without knocking. Arthur starts backing away in a panic, trying to tell himself that he was just acting in self-defense, but then, he notices the maid is down on her knees. She's clutching her hand, which is red and scalded from the hot tea he just knocked over. Arthur tries to shake it off. He tells himself it doesn't matter and that he shouldn't care because, as far as he's concerned, anyone who causes him pain is just another enemy. But instead of getting mad, the maid looks at him with total worry and asks if he's the one who got hurt. This completely throws Arthur off. He holds his head in confusion, thinking there's no way this girl with these powers is the same person from his memories, the one who was the only person by his side back in that nasty prison cell. He starts losing it, clutching his hair and yelling that he doesn't know what's real anymore, especially since these memories make no sense to him. He's left wondering what they even are, because the only thing he can actually remember is the pain. The maid looks up at him, sounding pretty unsure as she says his name, Prince Arthur. He just stands there sweating, thinking about how everything is different now because he's telling himself he shouldn't be feeling any pain at all. It's like his head is spinning. But then she leans in close, looking him right in the eyes to ask if he's hurt. Arthur is totally stunned. He wasn't expecting her to care, so he just mumbles that he's fine and starts walking away, leaving her sitting there on the floor with all the spilled tea. But she doesn't let him go that easy. She tells him to let her see his hand, and he's just standing there confused, wondering what she's up to until she gently grabs his hand and says she's sorry. She looks really upset seeing the burn marks, and for a second Arthur actually softens up. He looks down at his hand and asks her if it really hurts that much, realizing that this is just how his ability works. He's stuck with it. But the maid isn't just going to stand by, and she gets this look of total determination on her face. She tells him straight up that she's going to heal him, and just like that she starts using her healing magic. Arthur watches his hand as it starts to glow, feeling the power actually working. Arthur looks at his hand and gives a small smile, telling the maid that it's all better now. The healing worked perfectly. The maid looks down, still feeling a bit guilty, and asks him how the pain is feeling. Arthur starts to reply, but she suddenly loses her cool and starts yelling that he shouldn't have used his magic like that. Arthur is just standing there, totally caught off guard by her outburst. She gets all worked up, telling him his power is way too precious to be using on minor injury. She gets a bit quieter, adding a soft thank you for the help, though she goes right back to shouting that he shouldn't be wasting magic on a commoner maid like her. Arthur is looking at her like she's lost her mind, and she suddenly realizes how she's been talking to a prince. She hides her face in her hands, panicking about her own nerve and trying to take back what she said. Arthur just shrugs it off, telling her it's fine since he was the one who startled her in the first place. He starts to walk away, but then he stops for a second and he looks back at her with this really awkward expression. The maid just stares up at him, waiting for him to finish his thought, until Arthur admits that whenever he looks at her, his chest starts to feel kind of weird and painful. He looks down at his hand, and the maid is just standing there, face turning bright red because she can't handle the tension and just bolts. She screams that she's going to go grab a broom to clean up the tea, leaving Arthur standing there by himself. Arthur stands there thinking about what just happened. He realizes that the maid actually has a point and stares down at his hand, processing the fact that he's never actually used his healing magic on a commoner before. He starts thinking back to his lessons where his old tutor used to sit him down and make him listen. The guy would always go on about how his healing magic was way too precious to be wasted, and he'd tell Arthur to make sure he used it wisely. Arthur would just smile and think about how amazing he was, but the tutor would get serious and ask him if he really understood the weight of his power. The rule was always the same. He wasn't allowed to use his magic unless his tutor was right there watching. Arthur snaps out of the memory, holding a book and remembering that's just the way he was raised. So he looks at the shelves and tells himself he'll just have to report the incident with the maid to his tutor later. But then he spots something weird on the shelf. He pulls out a ragged old book and wonders what it's even doing there. Arthur realizes the book he found isn't a magic tome at all. It looks more like a notebook or something, so he flips it open and sees an entry from the year 21 of the lunar calendar. He figures out it's actually a diary. As he reads further, his face goes pale because the book talks about a revolution starting and Arthur Pendragon getting executed. He completely loses it and yells, dropping the book on the floor while wondering why this timeline is so creepy. He shouts about how terrifying the whole thing is, but then quickly tells himself to shut up before someone hears him. Arthur stares at the book from a distance, sweating and scared, but he can't help feeling curious about what else is in there. He picks it back up and starts frantically flipping through the pages. He's desperate to see what happens next. The book describes how his own younger brother led a successful revolution against the crown, which leads to a specific entry about what happened to him when he turned 20, and it's not looking good. The diary says Prince Arthur was captured and thrown into prison at his own estate. Arthur just stands there, totally shocked. Arthur reads that he's going to be tortured and then finished off by a guillotine, and he just loses it and screams, right as he's panicking. An hourglass falls off the shelf and bonks him right on the head, making him realize that none of this was a dream, and to make things worse, his stomach starts growling while he's stuck on the floor. He grips his head in the dark, finally putting it together that time actually rewound to just before his execution, meaning this gruesome future where he loses his head is exactly what's waiting for him if he doesn't do something fast. He tries to stay calm by telling himself it's just one possible timeline, but he's still desperate to find any way to avoid that ending. As he looks closer at the pages, something catches his eye and he's completely caught off guard by whatever he just read. He yells out, asking what the hell the book is even talking about. The story shifts to the servants, where one of the maids mentions how she's been hearing some gossip from the others. It turns out everyone is talking about how Prince Arthur actually used his healing magic to help someone out. The guy behind everything shows up. It's Goyak, Prince Arthur's tutor, and he looks like he's up to no good, while the maids bow down and confirm to him that the rumors about Arthur's change in behavior are actually true. So Goyak starts thinking it over, noting that Arthur has never once mentioned doing anything like charity before. He suddenly grabs one of the maids, hitting way too close and asking if she seduced the prince with her body. The maid starts shaking and tries to pull away. She begs him to let her go and swears she'd never do something like that. A couple of other maids watch from around the corner, but they're too scared to help since they know there's nothing they can do. Goyak realizes they can't defy a noble anyway, and thinks it might be a great idea to let the prince get distracted by a woman. He figures that turning the prince into a total fool would work out perfectly for his plans, telling her to just use her body and even offering to pay her more. But the maid just cries and says Arthur isn't that kind of person. Right then, Arthur steps in and blocks Goyak. He looks pretty annoyed and asks what the hell he's doing to his maid. Goyak just smiles and acts like nothing's wrong, but the maid is totally shocked to see Arthur standing right there. He tries to laugh it off and says it's nothing serious, already moving to walk away from them like he's got a clean conscience. Goyak makes up an excuse about just scolding a clumsy maid, but Arthur isn't buying it and just keeps a serious look on his face. The maid is still shaking. Arthur tells the tutor there's no need to worry about her, so Goyak just agrees and tries to end the conversation right then. He waves his hand and says he'll be heading out, acting like he's got better things to do than stand around. But Arthur stops him in his tracks. He tells Goyak to hold it right there, and the old man looks back with a really nervous expression. Arthur goes on about how he feels like a completely different person today, while the maid just stands in the back looking at him. He suggests they have a little talk, and you can see Goyak starting to sweat because he knows things are about to get real. Goyak asks what the prince needs from him, trying his best to act natural, while they face off in the middle of the palace. The tutor swears he'd do anything for the prince, so Arthur starts to explain what's actually on his mind. Arthur flashes a bright smile while dropping a bombshell. He tells Goyak he wants to take a look at the kingdom's financial record. The prince asks for some help with the request, but Goyak is already sweating bullets and looking like he's about to lose it. Arthur explains that the thought of doing nothing has been nagging at him, and since he's a prince, he figured he should finally start doing some actual work, even if he's still questioning if he should. Goyak tries to play it cool and starts to protest by mentioning his role as a tutor, but Arthur just cuts him off and tells him not to worry about a thing. Arthur then tells Goyak he wants to reward him for all his hard work. The old man is totally confused and doesn't see this coming at all. In the back of his mind, Arthur is thinking about the maid he just healed and how she was covered in nasty burns and blisters. He forces Goyak into a chair and offers to fix his stiff shoulders, while the little maid rushes off to do whatever the prince ordered, leaving Goyak sitting there thinking about how spoiled the prince is. Arthur starts to bring up another point while he gets to work. Arthur points out that nobles hardly ever seem to get any injuries, looking pretty thoughtful as he says it. He finishes his thought by saying it's probably because they just make their servants do every single thing for them, which just leaves Goyak looking completely puzzled. Arthur leans in close and asks Goyak if he remembers the countess he brought over a while back, flashing back to the countess approaching the prince and complaining that her hands were hurting her like crazy. Arthur looks pretty curious as he asks how she even managed to hurt herself like that. The countess begs him for a quick heal, feeling totally embarrassed while explaining that she comes from a merchant family. She laughs about how she spent the entire day doing nothing but counting coins, while Arthur and Goyak just watch her. Back in the present, Arthur says that story really cracked him up, but Goyak is just standing there looking completely lost. Arthur suddenly grabs Goyak's hand and points out that his hands look like they're in pretty bad shape too, making the prince notice that there aren't any natural oils left on the man's fingertip. He sees blisters in the exact same spots the countess had them, which means Goyak has been up to the same thing, and the old man just laughs it off while telling Arthur he's got a lot of nerve. Goyak tries to play it off with a smile, claiming he actually comes from a merchant family too, but the word liar hangs in the air. Nobody is buying his story anymore. The old man keeps digging his hole by saying nobles never lift a finger, while the maids just watch with pure disbelief. Arthur doesn't let him off the hook, telling Goyak the only thing he's ever counted is the prince's money, and the word embezzlement starts spreading through the staff like wildfire. The maids can't believe what they're hearing as the realization hits that everyone in the hall has heard every single word of the confrontation. Arthur looks at the blisters on the man's hands and calls them disgraceful, mockingly offering to heal them. Then Goyak starts sweating bullets as the prince demands he hand over all the financial records right now. Arthur stands over him and asks why he's making such a pathetic face. He calls Goyak a helpless, spoiled noble, asking if he's happy to see his student finally growing up. Goyak is sweating bullets, barely able to process how much the prince has changed right in front of him. He tries to fake a smile, claiming he's actually happy to see this growth, but Arthur just stares him down like he's garbage. The old man doesn't waste another second and scrambles away, letting out a massive sigh of relief once he's clear of the prince. As soon as he's gone, the maids crowd around Arthur, cheering and telling him what a great job he did. They're all super hyped that he actually stood up for them, but Arthur just stands there looking completely lost. He starts blushing and waving his hands around, trying to stumble through an excuse because he's not used to the attention. Inside his head, he's freaking out because he knows he was just bluffing the whole time. The reality hits him that Goyak is actually running off with his cash, and with that dark future still looming, he realizes he messed up. He turns tail and runs, shouting at the maids to get back to their jobs just to hide how embarrassed he is, and the girls just watch him go, thinking he's actually kind of cute for being so shy after acting like a hero. One of the maids watches him leave, blushing as she thinks about how he's actually a lot nicer than everyone says. Night falls over the palace grounds and the full moon hangs high in the dark sky. Arthur is back in his room going over his notes, thinking to himself that finally sticking it to Goyak felt pretty great. But the mood doesn't last because he still hasn't figured out a way to stop his own execution from happening. He starts panicking as the pages of his book suddenly start flying all over the place like crazy, and looking at the mess on the floor, he's convinced he just completely screwed things up. He drops to his knees feeling defeated, thinking about how avoiding his dark future is basically impossible. But as he goes to pick up the papers, he sees something that makes him stop and take a second look. He realizes the entire section about Goyak stealing all his money has completely vanished from the pages, and just then, the book actually speaks to him, saying the future has changed, which sends Arthur into a total freakout. Arthur's losing it, shouting that it would have been great to know the future changed before he started panicking. He asks what it even means for the future to change, and even though the book tells him to chill out, he's still worried the revolution is going down. The thought of the guillotine is still stuck in his head, and he's terrified that his life still ends the exact same way. He yells out, asking what the point of any change is if he's still going to get executed regardless. But suddenly this little chibi-made doll grabs him, which honestly just leaves him standing there completely confused. He stares at the doll and realizes it's the maid he helped earlier, seeing her face clearly now. A new message pops up saying that the maid's friend is actually against the execution now. Arthur looks at the pages in shock because he knows for a fact that wasn't in the original timeline. The book updates to show he healed the maid and called out the nobles, giving him one good deed point for his trouble. Looking out at the garden, he starts to realize that maybe his actions can actually change the future after all. Arthur decides that if this is how things are, he's going to play along with the world and start winning people over to build up favors, since he's basically drowning in execution flags and he's feeling pretty confident. He figures with his healing magic, avoiding the axe will be easy, and he can't help but let out a little laugh as he vows to run from that execution with everything he's got, determined to dodge judgment and carve out a better future for himself. He immediately gets to work by pointing at the maid he just saved and announcing he's appointing her as his personal maid right then and there. The shock of the news is so big that a giant scream rings out across the entire palace grounds, and the poor girl is standing there totally defeated, thinking to herself that everything is over. She's already mourning her career, convinced that her short life as a maid is basically finished. While she's losing her mind in the background, a woman with wavy hair watches the scene unfold as the girl keeps repeating that it's all over. The maid is face down on the ground, crying so hard she says she can't even scream, leaving everyone else wondering what on earth just happened. The woman, who turns out to be head maid Marianne, just looks on with a bored expression and tells them to just call her already. The maid Arthur just saved is totally losing it, slumping over while she desperately calls out for Marianne, who's just standing there watching the girl have a breakdown. The maid manages to explain that the prince actually asked her to be his personal maid, and Marianne just freezes with her mouth wide open, repeating the words like she can't believe what she's hearing. She flips her attitude immediately, telling the girl that only the most trusted maids get that title. She's treating it like a huge promotion and is basically celebrating, but the maid looks even more stressed out, thinking about how things were going fine until Arthur started talking about his new goals. He tells her he wants to start earning some good deeds, and as they walk through the palace grounds, she asks him what he's even talking about. Arthur just nods, explaining that if he starts healing the regular people, it'll be way easier to win them over and get them on his side. He points out that she's already familiar with them, so it'll be easy for her to do the talking while he does the work. He grabs her hands with a big smile, announcing they're going to heal every injured person they find, one by one. The maid claps her hands together with a big smile, telling Arthur he did a great job today, but Arthur isn't feeling it at all, saying that what they did just isn't enough, which leaves the maid completely confused, and he just turns around to head back to his room without another word. As he walks off, the maid watches him go. She realizes that while everyone else was happy, Arthur looked incredibly sad, and the weight of the situation starts hitting her all at once. She starts losing it, shouting that this is way too much for her to handle, especially since she starts thinking that she's the one who made him look so miserable in the first place. Looking back at it, she realizes she totally failed at the one thing she was supposed to do. She starts shaking from the gloom of it all and looks over at Marianne, admitting she definitely doesn't have the confidence to be a personal maid. She looks for some kind of support, calling out Marianne's name while the head maid reaches out, but it's not for a hug because Marianne hits her with 2 quick slaps right across the face, leaving the girl absolutely stunned. Marianne explains those slaps were one for the prince and one for the girl herself, standing over her while the head maid points out that Arthur definitely had a reason for picking her, even if they don't get it yet. She admits she's curious about it too, and the girl looks up from the floor, saying she really needs to figure out why he picked her out of everyone else. She wants to know exactly what he wants her to do so she can actually come through for him. So Marianne mentions that the prince is likely dealing with his own heavy stuff, which might be why he chose a girl who's so clueless and honest. It seems like she's starting to see a different side of the situation, especially since Marianne reveals that Arthur's own mother actually started out as a commoner, and she suggests that the girl might just remind him of her. The maid can barely believe what she's hearing, but it makes her remember how Arthur told her that no weird stuff was going to be required from her at all. The maid starts repeating the part about the weird stuff, which makes Marianne completely lose her cool. She can't believe the girl actually asked the prince something that awkward to his face, and the girl just stands there feeling lost. Even with the motherly comparison, she has no idea what she's actually supposed to be doing in this new role, so Marianne gives her some simple advice. She just needs to spoil him. It sounds easy enough, but then the head maid takes it a step further. She suggests the baby play route, which leaves the girl totally speechless and confused. Marianne mentions that nobles have all kinds of twisted hobbies, and the poor girl looks like she's about to have a total meltdown while Marianne hands over a small paper bag. She tells the girl to take whatever is inside and just give it her best shot, but as soon as she reaches inside and pulls out a pair of lacy underwear, she starts screaming. The girl calls her out because her face is turning bright red, but Marianne just shouts back that it's nothing at all, and she wishes the girl good luck as she heads out to find the prince. The maid makes up her mind to follow through and spoil him just like she was told. Meanwhile, Arthur is just walking along by himself, thinking about the fact that he actually has a personal maid now. Arthur yells out in total shock, catching the maid off guard and leaving her standing there shaking. His reaction is way more intense than she expected, and the maid starts overthinking things, looking at him and feeling bad because he seems so sad and lonely. In reality, Arthur is just annoyed that his magic notebook isn't showing any new updates, so she decides it's time to step up as his personal maid and try out that crazy baby play idea. She hypes herself up for a big move and starts jumping around and shaking rattles like a total weirdo right in front of him. Arthur just stands there in dead silence with a blank face before finally asking what she thinks she's doing, but she doesn't stop, just keeps rolling and spinning around him with the rattles. Arthur is completely baffled by the whole display and eventually snaps, telling her she's being way too noisy. The maid immediately loses all her confidence and starts crying because she feels like a total failure, leaving Arthur sighing in exhaustion. He tells her he just wants to find a way to get some actual rest for a bit, and the maid jumps at the chance to help, suggesting he uses her lap as a pillow. Arthur completely loses his cool and starts stuttering, unable to believe she's actually suggesting something like that, but she just gives him a bright smile and says it's a scientifically proven way to relax. It doesn't help the situation at all, and Arthur is left feeling incredibly awkward and embarrassed, wondering if she's actually serious about the whole thing. Arthur's face is buried deep in the maid's lap. She tells him to look at the beautiful sky, but he just replies that he literally can't see anything right now. It's way too much for him, so Arthur tells her to forget the whole pillow thing and just go make him some tea instead. She's all over it, saying she'll have it ready in no time, and as Arthur starts walking away, he tells her he wants extra milk in his drink. The maid watches him go with a super serious look on her face before she suddenly loses it and screams that she's his if he'll have her. Arthur completely panics, telling her to wait a second because things are getting way out of hand, and the two of them end up collapsed on the grass. Arthur is totally drained, staring at the ground and asking her what is actually wrong with her, but she doesn't stop, calling out his name and asking if there's anything else she can do to help him out. Arthur has finally had enough and tells her he's just going to go back to his room to get some actual rest. The maid is left standing there totally stunned as he walks off, and she's still clutching the baby rattle she was using earlier, looking completely confused about where it all went wrong. She watches him leave and realizes he still looks really depressed. She decides she has to cheer him up no matter what, so she prepares to use her ultimate last resort and heads straight for his room. She peeks through the door with a nervous look, calling out his name to see if he's ready for her next move.